Hello, and welcome to another episode of Factor 2. You probably notice a slightly different ambience today. That's because I'm recording outside. I'm in a field on the farm that I grew up on. From most of the fields on the farm, you can look out across the valley at this limestone escarpment. And that was my view for my whole childhood. Out the kitchen window, you could see it. I started climbing when I was 13 or 14, but I've done remarkably little climbing on this escarpment over the years. Really just the odd route and a few of the classics. And there were lots of reasons for that. It's on top of the hill, it's north facing, it's pretty dirty, there's loose rock, the pegs are pretty old, it's hard to find belays at the top. Yeah, it's not a very appealing place in some ways, even though the handful of routes are brilliant. And it's quite weird to come back 20 years on at this point and look at it with fresh eyes and just think, actually, if you went up there today and you were doing the first ascents, you'd bolt it, and it would be an amazing mid-grade sport crag. There'd be a few harder lines, but it would be really popular. There are people here who see it as a kind of bastion of adventure climbing in the area. I'm not going to tell you what this crag is, actually, but if you read my blog or follow me on social media, you can probably piece together the clues. And the main thing, I think, is just looking across the valley and kind of a wasted resource. Because I know this thing is really valued by a small group of people. But it would have been an amazingly popular crag as a sport crag. And that's really what today's story is about. You're listening to Factor 2 from UK Climbing. My guest today is Pete Oxley. Pete was responsible for hundreds of new routes in Dorset, as well as retro-bolting existing lines. But he also put up new routes in Avon and Cheddar, in South Wales in the Peak District, and in New Zealand and Australia, where he now lives. In this episode, though, I was mostly concerned with Portland, because it represents this kind of birth of a new style. And it's not the only place that's happening by any means. But in the case of Portland, I thought it's interesting just how headstrong Pete needs to be. Because he's not just putting bolts in to get some new routes done. He's part of a scene which is creating a whole new wave of climbing in the UK. One that we take for granted today.
Hello to you again. If you're listening to last night's programme, or if you heard Mike read earlier on, you'll know that this is an all-singles programme. I might as well tell you now that it doesn't involve as many famous names as the programmes sometimes do, but I hope that you'll listen to it all anyway for this particular reason. I'm endlessly prattling on about the vast number of independent singles being released, and these are records of some merit which are not getting as much exposure as they deserve, usually. And so tonight...
Again, being probably a bit isolated with school and stuff, didn't have a lot of friends, I suppose, and yeah, not that it was, I like people knew me and stuff, but there was never any great interaction. So I really, like a lot of people, probably got into music as a way of identifying yourself. And
the Almost Brothers.
It was like a choice between punk and disco. So punk was kind of it. In the late 70s, early 80s, it was post-punk, and that was really where I got a lot of interest from, a lot of satisfaction, because a lot of the people involved in it, and I'm talking about indie music here, independent thinking bands, and it's still the same today. I would seek out people who are really inventive, very creative, expressing their own way of doing things. And I found a mirror to climbing, really. But, bands like Joy Division and so on, back at the start of things, they really related to it because they're kind of outside of the normal sphere of music, weren't they? And I felt the same way with climbing, and it resonated a lot, and I just love their music. And because I found it deeply motivating. I still find it like that now. If I'm having a down day or something, which is pretty rare, but I'm having a bit of I can't be bothered going out in the drizzle to do a bit of climbing. You just got to put on something you like, put a bit of ride on or something, and you're out the door before you know it. Put a bit of Smashing Pumpkins on, Everlasting Gaze, stick that on YouTube. You're going to be through the door and leave a hole in the door the shape you want to be to get to the crag as quickly as possible. I always found that. like people who used to climb with, like the Cook brothers and that, they'll remember that. Going out in my purple Capri to Portland was usually an oral experience of ear busting dimensions. Listening to Helmet or something crazy, going down there and just being pumped up. By the time you got there, your adrenaline's to the max and can't wait to get going. And it's always been like that, really.
Issued at the end of October, and if you watch the TV programme Something Else, you'll have seen them do the song. It's called Transmission.
And when I started climbing when I was 14 properly, I was super interested in what was happening up north and in the history of climbing at that point. And I always have been anyway. But at 14, in Dorset, in 1980, there was nothing happening, and it was just really hard to even go climbing, because I don't think people get it now. You don't go to a climbing wall. There are no climbing walls. There was no training. There's no bolts. There's nothing. There's just this history of some really interesting characters who put up some traditional climbing. And Swanage was a place which, if you haven't climbed at Swanage, is one of the most fearsome places to go climbing in the UK. If you go climbing at Swanage and you can be successful at it, you're definitely cutting the mustard, because super intimidating cliffs, sea cliffs, difficult to get into, loose top outs. The rock is often rotten in many places, and you've got to be driven even just to want to go down there anyway. But at 14, there was nothing much happening. I was just super into the idea of being a climber at that point. My own personal history was just a real passion for the outdoors. Used to go on holidays with my mum and dad, Cornwall and stuff. And I'd say with anybody who's kind of done something in a sport, I think it's almost predetermined that was going to happen to you. There are certain key things in life that happened to me. I grew up in North London, Potters Bar, which, if you've ever been up that way, is just a grey nothingness on a junction on the M25. It's an absolute nightmare. But my parents were really old, actually, and they were tired and made the brilliant decision of moving to Dorset. Then I was kind of searching for sports that would fulfill me personally in a sort of a personal challenge, if you like. And I went through a period where I was into orienteering. I used to compete in orienteering when I was around 10. Did pretty well, actually. Then got into cycling. My brother's a dead keen cyclist, and it all kind of spiraled down to I'm searching for this sport that would kind of fulfill a kind of inner, passion for something that would fulfill me internally rather than a team sport. I love football and all that stuff, but don't get me wrong. Being able to push yourself personally was always at the core of anything I wanted to do.
I'm really obsessed with climbing to such an extent. I have to climb just more or less every day. If I don't go climbing, I feel as though I haven't done anything that day. The danger.
And then around 1979, like a lot of climbers around the UK, we suddenly saw Rock Athlete came on the TV. If you haven't seen it, it's like Ron Fawcett, Pete Livesey, taking a very personal, trained approach to climbing, and it just clicked with me that was what I wanted to do more than anything in the world. I just remember seeing the footage of him soloing at the start of Rock Athlete. Even to this day, was deeply moving, and it still is. Just to watch him moving fluidly as an athlete over natural ground with the wind blowing through his hair. I don't think there's anything you can actually surpass in life, because climbing is one of those sports that I quickly realised a lot of sports are not very interesting. You go cycling, time trialing, it's dead boring. You're just kind of facing the pain of, can you make it through 25 miles at a certain speed? But climbing is like a combination of dance and mental approaches. It's got that fear factor, rolls it all into one, and it just clicked with me straight away. Then,
come on. You're still fairly.
And having moved down to Dorset with my dad when I was like 10, it wasn't long before I was thinking of, like becoming a mountaineer. Like I remember I went to see Chris Bonington in Southampton, I think about 1978. I got his autograph in his book. I thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then 1979, pretty much that was changed instantly into wanting to be like a rock athlete at age 14. I never really thought any differently from that point on, even to now, and I'm 55, and I still think the same way. It's just all I want to do in the morning. If you gave me half a chance, it'd be to get out climbing really and push myself as hard as possible.
Hello again, lovelies. For me, a weekend of small embarrassments and frustrations, which hopefully will be swept aside by a week of dynamic programmes, a positive riot of rhythm and melody. Tonight,
I think it's like a rebellion thing.
Country. We start with Dance Society.
So I find it really, really tightly worked in with climbing. So I remember, like, I'd have an off day, rest day, and I would have a list drawn up back in the early 90s and go up to Revolver Records in Bristol, and it was just as good as going climbing to go in there and get the latest from some record label in the States that you love, or get the latest ride thing, or something cool that you've just been noting.
One of the things that kind of definitely forged my own personal inner drive, if you like, when we moved down to London, I did not enjoy school at all from the age of 11 till when I left at 18. It was a very lonely place, and there's no one into the outdoors at all. I pursued everything I wanted to do from completely inside myself. And at age 14, I remember one of the other forging points for me was I couldn't actually join properly the local climbing club because they had insurance kind of clause where you couldn't really go climbing until you were 16 as an official member of the club. Gobsmacking to say that now, but again, I count that as a really fortunate occurrence, because what happened then was that I just went into it's this creativity of being somewhere where there's nothing and there's no one influencing you. There's no one to tell you how to act or operate, which I really love, by the way. That's just kind of... But, I actually ended up thinking, what can I do? And what did Ron do? He went traversing on barn walls, and he just went climbing 8 hours a day on anything he could find, and people like Jerry and so on were doing the same thing. So I went out and chipped up some bridges. There was a bridge down near Poole in Dorset, which was near me. And I remember one summer, it was the summer when I was about 14, just went down there 2 or 3 hours a day, every day of the holiday. And I know, looking back on it, I was doing 5C to 6A problems on the walls there. I could stay on the 5C traverse for 30 minutes by the end of the summer. It's actually quite a similar story to some, people like Jerry and that, who were just traversing on school walls and things. It's a really similar sort of story, I guess, just trying to find a way through because there's nothing to train on. Before I was 16, I actually put in, which is quite prophetic, and I won't tell you where this bridge is, but if you're interested, you can always find out from me. There's another bridge down near a place called Wimborne, which I completely opened up as a training zone for myself. And I created a route which was about E56B at 15. And I remember I made a homemade peg with an eyelet in it, which my dad helped me out with, and I banged that in. And there was one guy at school who was into the cadets, and by this point I had bought a rope and I had some proper, boots and a chalk bag, of course. And I led this route on this one peg, or should we say a smashed-in bolt, whatever you want to call it. And that actually was my first ever lead, but before I ever went outside. So you can see, for me personally, it's all just it's all stuff I was making up in my own mind to get into climbing, because it didn't exist in those days. I mean, in 1980, the highest grade in Dorset was about E3 on trad. Big gnarly overhanging cracks with rubble, which is brilliant, by the way. Don't get me wrong, it's awesome. And yeah, it's like as soon as I left school, all I wanted to do was go climbing, really. So that's kind of where it started from. But it's all an inner passion, always was.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have been able to do it without, because I'd made the decision to be for good or bad, a full-time climber at age 18, and I was actually set to go to Sheffield Uni to do geology, funny enough, but I was so taken by what was potentially in front of me in Dorset and around, and Avon and stuff. I mean, it's just Cheddar is all I could see, that the massive amount of potential. I didn't see any point in going to Sheffield and becoming another dude on the scene up there. It wouldn't have been my thing anyway. Which is a bit odd, because you probably can't get a grip of the fact there was no one climbing back then, but much in the south. But that was part of the attraction, really. Is, you know, it's a real subculture and an underground movement, if you like. And I really loved that. I loved to hear about what Crocker was doing, and Crispin and Ken Palmer and Nick White. They were all doing the same thing. Everyone was just, you know, these individual characters. Mark Edwards. It was all really exciting time, and everything was on the table to do it. So yeah, you had to have the time to do it. So I was very fortunate. But as you say, to be able to do that in between training, and I was kind of climbing, training, drilling, cleaning. It was 5-6 days a week, and that was every week, every month for probably 10 years. Actually, I didn't really stop. So
again, this is just one of these things of the Southwest is generally overlooked by the media. You know, we always talk about these famous climbers in North Wales and the Peak, but I'm telling you, Martin Crocker is way up there. I mean, he's into. I'm very much into the creative output of climbing. I love new routing and that whole aspect of unearthing a new way up a cliff. You know, it's nothing more satisfying than that. And the same in Martin. He's extremely adept at being super creative, and that creativity actually of how he approached things really rubbed off on me a lot, of how to think a little bit outside the box, because again, there's no real figures you can look to down south. If you look to the northern media, it's going off in another tangent, you know, but super inspiring though to see what Ron and Jerry and Ben and all that lot are doing. And I think for me, the step beyond Martin was that I was blending the idea of athleticism and training into this idea of like a wild, creative approach to climbing. And I kind of blended that into a new way forward to race standards, you know, because you have to be trained to be able to like actually take those grades further. And I think Martin was much more into just acting on raw skill, which he had in abundance, and maybe some other people, but no one at that point, say we're talking like about 1984, had actually applied themselves into training in the south. It was just starting to happen, where a few individuals were starting to do that throughout the southwest. But we're only talking about a few people, and they're up against, including me, a wall of traditional ethics, which were you'd have to be pretty strong-minded to keep going through that. It's kind of an interesting time, because there were just suddenly these people polarizing in their different areas who are starting to push the standards, you know. So it's a cool time. The trip that kind of really turned me on into, I am not going to go down the normal route in life. Pentruan had kind of kicked off in about 1983, I think it was. And that act of Ben Moon bolting Statement of Youth in 1984, I remember I went there about 1984 for 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, I'd gone from being a traditional climber down the Ruckle in Swanage, doing E3, E4, In 2 weeks, I came back having on-sighted multiple 7Bs, like axle attack, all these things. I remember I did probably it was the second ascent of a 7B plus 7C of Andy Pollitt's in the roof area. I remember that route in particular. One of the locals said, "Fuck me, Pete. That's pretty tasty, mate. You know, actually, that's pretty good. Where the hell are you from?" But it was just really a turning point. That 2 weeks was, yeah, I know I'm doing what I want to do. And yeah, I just told my parents when I came back, I just want to be a climber and I'm going to do all I want to do with supporting myself. And it ended up pretty much I was full-time for nearly 10 years, much like a lot of people up north. Just pursued climbing to its end and just on the dole, went on the enterprise allowance scheme. Might sound horrendously selfish to many people, but to most people who were into climbing in those days, it was just that there was no other way, like the sort of monk life way of living to get things done.
In some ways, Pete had a really traditional apprenticeship, starting out with trad climbing and honing his craft on the cliffs down at Swanage. But as he progressed, he started to see the potential, what a few bolts here and there might be able to achieve, and the kind of routes they could open up.
I remember putting a bolt in a thing called Birth Pains and New Nations, which was the first radical move to open up super steep blank walls, which couldn't be really protected properly in any other way. And surprisingly, it didn't actually cause too many ripples, which was the interesting thing. I thought it would cause a lot more airtime in the mags, but we were so far south and so cut off from everything down south, you could kind of invent your own. It's a very creative time, that really creative, and I think that's possibly why I was really interested in the whole thing anyway. It's just you could kind of do what you wanted, and being influenced by what's happening elsewhere around the country, you could kind of take those ideas and put them into Portland. So Portland, yeah, 1989 onwards, it exploded rapidly with whole sectors having like minimal drill pegs, but it was really serious. A lot of routes you'd go a long way. None of it had been explored at all. It was just brambles and mudslides, and it was really difficult to get along. And it was 1988 when I went down there, having been exposed to all these different styles, and basically I was just searching for more places where one could open up hard climbing, which is at the essence, I guess, is what I really love doing, is trying to push myself on new routes that could be as difficult as possible. But going down Portland, I'd always assumed really that the West Coast was just too chossy. But then I heard that Crispin, and get this right, it soloed 2 routes, and I thought, interesting. Now, what is that about?
Actually, this anecdote isn't quite true.
He soloed.
While Pete was proofing the new Dorset guide, he realised that Crispin never soloed these routes. So while the inspiration might have been there, the actual reality wasn't.
City as hell. Beautiful flowstone sheet, and I remember going to look at it. Wow, that's actually really good, quite good rock actually. And started testing the flakiness of the calcite and that. And it's actually well stuck on. You know, it's pretty solid. It's actually looking really like going to a bit of Spain where I've just been on holiday. You know, and but the first bit I went to look at was Coast Guard North. I remember the first time I dropped over there, I don't think anybody had dropped over the edge there as a climber in years, other than fishermen. There was a fisherman's knotted rope down there. And I remember going on the bottom of that wall, and the first wall you get to, and it's like, wow, this really looks like what I'd been on holiday in 1984 when I'd gone to Lower Pentruan. You know, it's really similar looking. Yeah, it was very much like it was just solving a problem of how do you climb this hugely overhanging wall where there's no gear at one point. So this happened throughout a lot of the southwest. It was minimal bolting, and also we're talking hand drilling with star drills. So you're kind of self-limited, and this is the same the world over. I mean, it's the same in Australia. Half the reason why Grampians is so badly bolted is because they were just drilling by hand and stuff. You know, it's like people visit the Grampians and the places in Oz, and it's all just like big runouts. But it's very similar in Dorset and Avon and Cheddar and stuff. Crocker was doing the same, putting the odd bolt in, you know, like Edgemaster, Avon. It was really exciting climbing. It was an interesting way of doing it, but it's very subjective to you inspecting it and creating this situation that you'd leave for other people. And that's something that gnawed at me personally. The subjectivity of minimal bolting, and this God-given right, of course, that we give to the first ascensionist to create the aura of a climb, and that's something that maybe later on you'll understand why I moved away from that. But that was the state of play at the time. So people like Nick White and that, myself, just putting in very small amounts of bolts because they're hard to do anyway. We had no money. We skinned on the dole, and that was kind of the way it started. But it's also the fear of backlash that we are now treading into dangerous waters to suggest that we could even climb these walls. And I got it full frontal from many people for putting in. I remember the birth pains one. It was actually Tessellation, the route next to it, was the first bolt. So it was E56B. It made a headline in High Magazine, and I think Jeff Birtles decided to bury me on that day. But I just took it on the chin and kept going, because what's he going to do? Drive down and sort it out? Don't think so. Funny story. I remember. Maybe I should relay that for me personally, there's starting to be a welling feeling that this isn't. No one gives a monkeys about minimal bolted routes, and it's generally, as things are progressing in the north, you can see that if you're going to put bolts in, you need to do it properly. It needs to be either you do it or you don't. That really started to cement in me. But one story I relate. I remember. I think it was Realm of Chaos, absolute classic down the Wall's End. It hadn't been repeated. I don't know how many people had done it at that point, but in the first 4 or 5 years, no one had done it. I think it had like 3 drill pegs in it. But the fact was, of these drill pegs, that if you dogged on it, the rock was a bit soft, and these pegs, stainless steel pegs, would actually work loose. And I remember I was out climbing, but my parents had got a phone call. I don't know how they got their number, but I got back and I heard that someone from Bristol, a guy called Matt Ward, had taken a real whipper on Realm of Chaos and almost decked out. I know 1 or 2 of the pegs came out and he almost hit the ground from a long way up the wall. I found that immensely amusing at the time, but it kind of changed perspective that this wasn't going to work out long term. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting point, and I remember talking to mine about it a bit. But something else had to be sorted in my mind. I was still on the dole, by the way, at this point. So I'm just on. I had a little business building climbing walls, a bit like people from the North Enterprise Allowance. What can we do? I built the odd bouldering wall. Started making holds and things. So I wasn't. I was kind of supporting, but I was kind of mainly on the dole. I had no money. I was just surviving on nothing. I survived on nothing for maybe over 10 years, 15 years maybe. Just literally nothing. So the biggest quandary at that point was, if we're going to, or if me, it was no one else really doing it other than me and Martin. I'm still saying there was only me and Martin doing this at this point, to do with Portland and bolting and stuff. What sort of solution would enable proper sport climbs of the style of Statement of the Youth that we'd already seen in 1984 and were happening in Malham and so on? It was in my mind that this really needs to be the next step. And I remember putting up the first proper sport climb would have been something like Cocteau Phenomena, which is a 7B at Black North South, which was all hand drilled. I think it had six hangers put in it, or 6 drill pegs, one of the two. And that was the first one that you would actually say was a clip up from ground to top, But it was still like, I can't afford to do this. yeah, at this point, I think it was about 1990, I had a real sort of epiphany about where bolting was going to go in my own mind. But this minimal bolting thing is very subjective to who adds down it, because I'm telling you that no one repeated anything on Portland of note in the years when they were left as like, you know, minimal bolted 3-bolt wonders or something, or 2 bolts with big runouts and the odd bit of crap gearing. Because when you did put wires in Portland, it's cheesy rock and it probably wouldn't hold too well. And like I said, they're totally ignored. No one cared at all. So there's no kind of future for it as far as I could see. No one was going to ever come and repeat these routes. That was another factor. It would have been nice to see people on these things. So it's all kind of building towards what could be done to change that and move towards a more sporting outlet for it, because Portland was pretty obviously going to end up being quite a significant sports zone in my mind. No one else has really talked about it at that point, but I basically forced that to happen. I mean, that's probably the next big thing that happened, was making Portland happen. So there were all these routes, and there must have been like about 150 routes or something at that point that myself and also mine had done, that were minimal bolted things. And I was just trying to think, how can I come up with a solution to mass bolting, or even just putting up a sport route, right, that didn't break the bank, basically, because I was living on about 40 quid a week. And every penny I'd ever earned went into climbing. I remember I approached DMM. I think they'd just started making P-bolts for like stainless steel rolled P-bolts for like lower Pentruin. But they were really expensive and no one wanted to help. No one wanted to actually sponsor anything, because I said I need, 500 bolts, and they were just like, go away. So then I started experimenting with the ideas of what could you do. So when I first started tinkering in my dad's garage with bending bits of 316 steel, these hadn't been seen anywhere in the UK at this point. People were still putting in hangers like mammoth hangers and stuff like that. Were all pretty crappy, really. So yeah, it progressed on really quickly to testing these things out down the quarries. And if people want to go and see the very first U-bolt put in the UK, head on down to Winspit, because I basically set up the first U-bolt as a horizontally devised system, where it went in horizontally, not vertically, with the eye bent downwards, so that the quick draw would hang in the eye, which I still think is actually a pretty good idea even now. It would still work really well. But I tested that. I remember I put the first one in. It's actually there today. You could go down to, there's a little cave below a climb called Red Rain, and it's just in the back of the wall there. And there's a bolt there. You'll see it. That's the first U-bolt ever put in the UK. It should have a little plaque, actually. The council should think about that, because it's actually to me quite a significant little moment. And then I remember the first route I kind of experimented with actually putting them in a route was as a sport climb called Sugar Ray at Dancing Ledge, which I put 3 of them in, and it worked beautifully. But I put those in vertically because I realised that they could be stronger. It's all a bit hypothetical at this point. But it didn't take long, though, before the little band of brothers that were, really into the ideas that I'd already started, we went and tested a bunch down. There was Mike Robertson, myself, Damien Cook. I mean, we went down to Winspit, put a load in a big block below Guerrilla Action. You'll still see some there today. They were the original tests of the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 bolts. The Mark 2 one, by the way, is a development on the Mark 1 that has a twist in the tail of the bolt, and that put another 10 kilonewtons onto the pull-out, quite significant. And that's Mike Robertson's idea, because he was an engineer, he was a mechanic, Formula 1 dude. with the teams, very adept at working with steels. I started putting up some routes with the staples in it. It was quickly apparent that people were starting to realise what had been going on with Martin, myself. Like I say, there was a lot of people that I knew who were really into the idea of it, and they were starting to come out. My own friends were coming out, the Cook brothers and Steve Taylor and people like this locally were coming down and enjoying clipping some of these bolts. I loved naming the routes, and it usually is fed back to the tunes I was listening to at the time. A lot of it came from that, like a lot of it. So it's actually, to do the climbing in Dorset, you're going to be listening. You're going to be actually experiencing a catalogue of what I was listening to back in the day. But I think that's quite a common story. I was watching a vid the other day of Italian climbing history, really good one actually. You've probably seen that just come up, and the dudes, they're interviewing each of the dudes through the ages, and they're all pretty much saying how music really influenced and backed up the way they felt about climbing and expressed the same mood they were expressing on the type of routes they were doing. I find that is the same sort of thing. I mean, a lot of the big roof routes, for example, like say like adrenochrome at Stair Hole, it's a powerful, punchy route. It's got a bombastic feel. You're in this massive overhang. And I used to love Sisters of Mercy. It's got awesome bass riffs, really punchy, riffy tunes. And Adrenochrome is one of my all-time favourite tunes, and it just mirrored the climb perfectly. If you listen to that tune, that is climbing that route. I'm hearing the tune straight away as soon as I'm thinking of the route, and I found that a lot with climbs. Also, I like a lot of I guess what you call it, shoegazing music. It's kind of my kind of thing. Bands like Ride, real dreamy, I guess melancholic type tunes, really. And a lot of the time you're on Portland, the sun going down. It's mystical. It's a mystical place, Dorset. It's full of pagan history, and just that feel of being lost on the west coast there. A lot of the climbs felt really, probably don't now because you're probably queuing for half of them, but back in the day there's no one around, and it's got a mystical feel to it, so a lot of the tunes felt often mirror that sort of thing, or just how you felt on the day. Sometimes you're really energized, and I was into a lot of different music. I mean, I used to listen to, whereas other people might have a social life and go out on a Friday evening or Saturday night, I was religiously listening to John Peel. Like Friday night was 11 till 2 in the morning or something. Just listen to what he's doing. He was basically more of an influence to my climbing than anybody else, because his music choice was immaculate. I mean, wide ranging, and I loved everything he played, really. It could be anything from a South African little guitar band to Polish thrash music to a Japanese speed band or something. It's just awesome music. Yeah, I just had personally that I, talking to a small band of friends, that this vision of turning this island into something that could be a mecca for sport, it just seemed really obvious to me and to my friends. And I was climbing full time, so I was the man in position to do it, really, and I was just dead keen to do it. And so it took about, probably about a year to retrobolt everything, like every sector, and I was probably putting in about, I could do three long routes in the ruckle a day, so that'd be about 35 to 40 bolts.
Pete actually means Wall's End here, on the west coast of Portland.
So between 40 to 50 bolts a day I could put in, but it was pretty brutal work. And I think it's actually, I was just going to say, it's probably led to where I am now. I've just had a hip operation, and I think the amount of work I did
for maybe 10 years or something. It's taken its toll. I think I retrofied about 200 routes, and it all happened so fast that people probably didn't realise what had just happened, because it was some really interesting and really important meetings happened in Dorset back in the day, which again people won't realise was the key moments in cementing this. Because if it had gone another way, it wouldn't be like you see it today. But it was really funny actually. There were some BMC meetings where obviously the local climbing club traditional were very against it all. Quite a few people, up in arms about it all. But the people who are actually active, i.e. me, my friends, people who are seriously into going out climbing, we were just having a great time, And I remember there's one key meeting where, well, there's two or three actually, but the first one was really funny because we'd kind of come up with a plan for, well, let's have Battleship Edge. That could be a sport zone. I've named this area. That's called Battleship Backcliff. This area here is going to be called Blacknor Fast South. That all kind of laid out as a meeting agenda, and they're all going to be bolted, okay? And hands up, what happened was, I remember I got 2 or 3 van loads of the keen youths to come out. All their hands went up. Yes. And then who's against it? Well, a few beards went up in the corner. There, we're against it. Okay, passed. Cool. Game on then. So that's really one of the key moments actually with Dorset, was that it just got cemented as official zones quite early on. And I'll take it on the chin that, yeah, definitely I made that happen. I just forced it to happen, and it was essentially it was like voting by van load, and that basically cemented those areas as game on, and it snowballed from there. I mean, I was training like unbelievable amounts. I'd basically what you'd call a high maintenance climber. So I had to do a lot of training, to my mind, to be as fit as I wanted. Probably more the modern competition climber mindset, really. So the training days out, which was always, I mean, the rationale behind doing so much stuff is, I always thought that time. I used to have this, just a daily saying of time is running out, and I'd say that to myself every day. So if it was pouring rain or it's snowing or something, you'd go out anyway and climb in the rain and just get on with it, because that's time is running out. And I was really into shunting routes, huge amounts of shunting from like day one. And that was really due to there's no one around midweek to climb with much. It was very difficult to get routes done in the mid-80s, I'd go soloing down Swanage for like a couple of hours, then go along to like the Boulder Ruckle and stuff, and try and set myself a minimum of 50 E-points. It was always between 50 E-points and 100 E-points in a day. To do that on a shunt, it usually averaged out around 60, 70 E-points. Sometimes it did go beyond that. I'd say Laughing Arthur was probably one of the dumbest ones in a way, because I did clean on a single 9mm on occasion, and shouldn't have done that. But yeah, a lot of it was, going the big roof climbing, which is another passion of mine. Probably the most. I don't really remember the sport climbing so much. It's actually the big roofs are what I remember as the most enjoyable aspect of things. But yeah, a lot of the cleaning of those things is really dangerous, and you're hanging the rope soaring away on the edge of something, or you're literally cleaning a block, which you're working out in your mind, how can I clean around this block if I can peg around the top of it and the bottom bit goes, is that going to be all right? Am I going to survive that? You're literally making these calculations all day long. And I remember the stress of being down places like Blackers, or, you know, when you're on your own midwinter with the fog coming in and it's freezing, and you're making these decisions that, you know, will this block take me out or will it not? If I go up above it a bit with a knife blade, will that stay in whilst I prise it out with a crowbar or something? Then it, you know, you do it and your heart, it's in your mouth for a moment. I mean, I remember once, I was always a bit blasé with cleaning. I remember it was one of the day 2 or 3 climbing through Laughing Arthur. I was trying to take out all the old wooden wedges that had been left behind. I was clipped into one. I was always a bit slack with having because to clean a roof really well is kind of interesting. I won't go into detail, but it's much more efficient if you don't get too tangled up with too many slings. So I used to keep it real minimal. Yeah, this wooden wedge came out, and I'd actually taken my Jumar clamp off at that point. I remember swinging out about 25 foot, just hanging on the rope because I hadn't actually clipped myself to my foot loop, and I was literally just swinging around, hanging on the rope, just with my foot loop, which fortunately was kind of on properly. Otherwise, I would have gone to the bottom. But there was like loads of moments like that where you just think, "Wow, I kind of got away with that," or something. I had lots of near misses with cleaning routes, that's for sure. Yes, some things did come to a head somehow, but it's all pretty minor. Back at Blackers Hole, I remember I must have cleaned the first pitch one autumn. I think the bird bands were in place or something, and I couldn't go back. But anyway, it was the next winter by the time I got to go down there. But I'd left the rope hanging from the belay down into the cave, and I tied it off at the bottom. But by the time I got back there the next season, someone had obviously taken offence to the fact, and I can't blame them really, that I'd left this 9mm rope hanging there at the back of the cave, and they'd set fire to it. It was kind of swinging around. It'd been swinging around all summer, but I knew the effort to get in there, because you'd have to aid in a 100-foot roof to get to that point. It would take me a day just to even aid in to get another rope back in there. I thought, oh, bugger this. I can just reach it with the tip, standing on this 25-foot boulder. I could just reach the end of the 9mm, which had been burnt and set alight. And I managed to stretch it down a bit and put a clamp on it. And I remember just doing a pull-up on it and putting another one on. I just hoped for the best. It had been blowing around there all summer, literally blowing. And I just took the gamble that it'd be all right. And I was heart in mouth the whole way, expecting just to go back into the boulders from 80 foot up, and just kept going until I got to the belay. And yeah, it had gone through the sheath on a few places, but it was still in, if you've got 4 or 5 strands, you're going to make it. So, yeah, I managed to get to the belay and survived that one. But yeah, it's kind of a typical situation down there, trying to make a way through with not much kit. Yeah, I don't think anybody else even thought about doing that. But yeah, one thing that I guess is pretty apparent to you, is that I'm pretty driven to just do things. Again, that's really rare. I don't think you don't meet many people who want to do it to that level, Yeah, I think it probably meant more to me as well, because this might sound a bit strange, but because I was kind of really isolated in a way and experiencing climbing in like a vacuum really, in those early days, there were very few people. A lot of the time as well, I was spent on my own, either cleaning or training, and then you try and arrange partners to finish these things off, and that was hard, the crux of everything. Because you're spending so much time alone, and I actually found music to be, it's an odd thing to say, but almost like the friends you never really had. It was like the bands. Probably a shrink would find that quite funny. Yeah, I still do. I still find a lot of solace and just joy, actually, as soon as I put a band on that I like. just feel really whole again. But other people might get that from going out clubbing or go for a coffee with a bunch of mates or something. But I get that from music, and I really did in those early days, because you're kind of on your own a lot. But you weren't viewed as a great asset to society. So you had to live in this bubble, and the bands were like a mirror to that, because they were also living in their own little bubble. Like the first band I ever loved was The Jam, and you can get more, private society. This is the modern world. It's just like the best sound in the world, and that appealed to me instantly, and it gave you the energy to keep going with things. But I would never want to listen to music at the Cliff, because to actually listen to the wind and the sea sucking is the best music in the world, really. You don't need anything else. And to not hear that, actually, it would be a major disappointment. I mean, I love nature, and to just feel nature around you is the best thing in the world. And you don't feel that unless you're kind of isolated in a situation.
Pete was by no means the only person establishing these routes, but he does seem to be the one who put the most effort into making them into lasting legacy. And that's the part that's really interesting to me. There's a kind of glory of being a first ascensionist and opening up adventures that some of your friends can go on, or maybe people further afield. But it's quite a different legacy to create a resource that can be utilised by the whole community. And you can have a balance of the two. Big thanks to Pete for giving up a surprising amount of time for this episode. He'd also like to thank Jan Rostron, his parents, and the Portland Pipers for their support over the years. In 2021, he is launching a new brand, Infinite Gravity, named after one of his most famous routes. You've been listening to Factor 2 from UK Climbing. I'm Will Treasure. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget you can follow me on social media. You can also sign up for the newsletter, where I publish monthly articles and roundups, and there are a few extra tidbits on the site if you hunt around a little bit. It's factor2.co.uk.